I think it's probably time that we did start. We're all busy people, so that's really where I wanted to start this call, just to thank you for taking the time to find in your busy schedule to fit this webinar in. I'm pretty sure you're going to find it really interesting and informative and thought-provoking. My name's Carl Tapman. I'm the Client Account Director for Public Services, and I'm joined by my colleague Rob Latimer, who's the Environmental Director, and he'll be supporting me throughout this event. And we've got a couple of technical experts in the background pulling the IT strings, so thank you to Katie and Alex. Star of the show is going to be Alistair, however. He's the Principal Environmental Director, who's going to be showcasing his knowledge, expertise and passion for this topic shortly. Before we start, just a couple of housekeeping points, if I may. This session is being recorded, and I will be sharing the content via a link shortly afterwards and once we've completed this. So please feel free to take your time, peruse that at your leisure and share with colleagues as required. Now, at this point, your cameras are all switched off and you don't have the opportunity to speak to us directly, but we do want to make this as interactive as possible. So there's going to be a couple of polls interspersed throughout the session. And we're going to be asking you questions, so it's not completely sit back and relax. So there will be questions raised of you, but there will also be the facility to raise some questions as we go along, either in the Q&A facility if you want to remain anonymous, or in the chat. So if you think of anything that crops up as we're going along, please jot it down in there, and then myself and Rob will coordinate and collate these questions at the end and then present them to Alistair for his take on what he thinks and what his solutions might be. So really, that's enough from me at this point. I'm going to hand you over to the expert, Alistair, who's going to let you know who he is and tell you what's in store for you. Thanks for your time.
Well, thank you, Carl. Hopefully, if someone could just, by means of a thumbs up, confirm you can see my slides. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Carl. Yes, these are the three individuals that were mentioned, and as well as some others. Thank you, Phil. The talk today it covers a huge amount of ground, and I apologise for what will be quite a lot being squashed into a small slot. And I intend to cover issues around environmental risk and climate adaptation and emerging liabilities as they relate to the public sector. What I want you to pick up, and what I'm hoping that you'll be able to explain, and maybe even I could test you at the end, is really understanding what is changing for you. There's been an awful lot of change, so just keeping up with it is difficult as it is, and also then really feed off some of the experience that we have that can highlight where we notice that organisations might be being caught out in respect to these issues, and also perhaps give you some telltale ideas and suggestions and some thoughts in terms of what you may need to do next. So that's the objectives of the discussion. As you can see, it's fairly mighty. And in all good presentations, you start with, well, where are we now? What's the big picture? And I'm sure that you will all have a good understanding of this now, but it is worth restating exactly what the key issues are that are driving everything that's happening that you need to look at and are responsible for. So just as a reminder, the world and humans on it are growing. We are urbanizing, we're migrating, and we're moving. So as a species, there's some drivers there. And as a result, there's difficulties with the distribution of resources, there's scarcities and competition for these resources. Notice that these are all pretty much environmental resources. And what is not happening is our involvement in terms of climate change and human-induced climate change, which creates degradation of these resources worldwide. And we also have other social drivers that are playing in the background in terms of our values and lifestyles are changing. Also, the means and the ways that we govern ourselves and that's partially also in response to technological change that's happening, a convergence of lots of different aspects and natures and impacts on our work practice and the services that you all deliver. And of course, there are significant geopolitical drivers. There's quite a lot of stuff that's happening outside of the day-to-day that influence what we're doing. But don't lose sight of this, and it does pin down to the local picture, and it can impact outcomes and your customers. As a little bit of a warm-up, and those of you who are sharp and still awake, I would love you to just quickly give me a few words in the chat, just as test, see what you like as a group. What environmental or climate related issues keep showing up in your organization? Maybe just one or two. I'm going to have a look at the chat now and see what you're giving me. Apart from sound experiences, overheating, flood risk, subsidence, floods, extreme weather, heat, subsidence. Well, hopefully this weekend there will be physical or transition. Yes, both. Transition, excellent. Thank you for engaging. I'll let that keep rolling. Storm claims, all the good stuff that we would expect to see. Decarbonisation, heat in the workplace. That's good. So thank you. So you obviously got lots of awareness of the key issues that we're facing, and just making this real and bringing it to something that you tangible for yourselves. The talk isn't the story. I'm not going to start at A and go all the way to Z. This is basically a talk that really looks at a series of chunks of information, of sort of observations and points. That there's a thread that goes through things, and really the overarching stuff that's happening externally is then reflected on the changes that you need to make as public sector organisations. So how do we go about exploring this? Well, the narrative and how I've set this up, we will look at really, well, how do public sector organisations manage risk, environmental risk, and where are the risks, where are the exposures, and fantastically, fungal pathogens, brilliant, Thomas Cantle. Fundamentally, climate change is having a broader range of risks, which you're very aware of. We'll just look a little bit further around in that area. There's regulatory changes, sustainability changes, and we can pick up, and I've mentioned a number of cases and work that we've done so we can highlight where things are going wrong. You may be aware of some, but this might flag some other aspects. Also identifying where these issues then may translate into a more significant issue or even a claim, and perhaps then look at some of the things that we could improve, which might be the tools, are they good enough, and also what good looks like, what sort of actions could we undertake. PC has got a hand up. I don't know if that's significant. Would someone be able to pick that up with PC? So that's the story. And then looking down more at where we are, the attendees here is fantastic. If you think about the audience that we've got within this room, we cover just insurance professionals, but also risk managers and governance, people who are involved with governance. But also there's lots of technical specialists here as well. So climate and asset managers and things like that. So the types of people in this room are exactly the ones that we want to have going forward all the time, really, when addressing these sorts of issues. Why am I talking to you? Well, I'm not an insurer. Firstly, I'm not an insurer. I'm a scientist originally who's also trained as an economist, and I've worked alongside local authorities, lots of public sector organisations, from planning to contaminated land, nature-based solutions, sustainability, governance, all around many different aspects of your activities. So it's not I'm not going to be talking the language of an insurer here, but I'm sort of speak on behalf of someone that has insight across the piece and has worked at the interface of all these aspects. So fairly unique position. Crawford has many people like me, and that's a feature of how we can work. Okay, so this is fantastic. This slide really, I was hoping to pick up and expand on some of the features that you'd identified in the chat, and I can see that a lot of these have come up. You've got lots of physical things within the chat, so the impacts of climate change, and you've mentioned lots of the physical aspects, but also nature degradation. Perhaps I didn't see quite so much of that, but if you think about nature degradation, that may then also have an impact onto flood risk. So a lot of these are interrelated impacts, and might affect protection of services or drainage or delivery of different services. ESG, just looking at that, didn't see so much here in terms of the direct issues, but changes and ESG is changing, and with greater expectations and application and implications for public organisations. Regulation, we'll talk about that. There's lots happening, and insurers and the markets. There's lots of pressures that come from that direction about what is insured, and costs are rising, which affects price of premiums and things like that. So these were some of the drivers I'd hope you were going to mention. As I said, I'm not an insurer, and by the way, don't freak out when you see this diagram. I want you just to gently concentrate your eyes on the navy coloured darker boxes in the middle. There's 3, and this is something that I've kind of developed for myself to help me understand and communicate to this audience here. I'm not an insurance specialist, but I needed to get a model of how public sector organisations may manage risk and deal with it across their structure. So if we just focus very briefly on the three darker boxes that are there, there are the box on the left, or bucket as I like to call it, on the left is a bucket of provision which relates to insured risks. So these are the sorts of catastrophic events, very high impact, quite rare events where you pay insurance and would expect to be covered and have provision for those events. But insurance doesn't cover everything, and there's a line. Some of you will be familiar with this sort of self-insured retention, or the SIR line, or if you think about it with your car insurance, if you're not familiar, and this is probably my level, is understanding that there's an excess. So it's a point at which you've got issues that will be insured, and below which you're kind of self-insuring, you're having to make provision for, and you're liable for costs if it's below a certain line. So that's talking about that bucket and how you might manage a group of environmental issues. What's really interesting is that a lot of the environmental risks, so if I look at the 2 navy boxes in the middle and on the right, a lot of the risks that are environmental risks actually sit below or away from that line. They are your problem. In fact, most environmental risks or issues are there. And if you look at this middle bucket, so the stuff you might have some planning for, and you can see there's a yellow boxes at the bottom, your risk management activities try to manage and plan for certain sorts of risks, and you'll have routine frequent lower value incidents that you manage within that middle bucket. But then there's a whole bunch of other stuff over on the right, which is it's not insured, it's emerging, it's uncertain, it's possibly avoided, and it's definitely unmanaged at the moment. And there's still a lot of environmental risks that fall under that. So it could be things like if you had a land ownership and had old landfills woe betide, what future liabilities may result from those, or you might have schools that are built on old landfills, or sites, housing sites that might have been built on contaminated land and had remediation undertaken, which may not be fit for use in 20 or 30 years down the line. So there's sort of risks there. I'm not going to look at all the other boxes around the outside in detail, but this was really helpful for me to understand that the environmental risks that we're talking about can sit in these three zones. Some of it's transferred to insurance, some of it you have to absorb, and that's your day-to-day, is dealing with the budgets and finding money to pay for whatever's happened. And then quite a bit that might be not fully recognised yet. Hopefully that's a helpful look. That was really interesting for me to do that exercise, and to then start to look at the sorts of press and issues that are occurring, and analyse what is happening in that context. And I can see, that process at work. So, for example, and we all know climate change is happening now. So, it's not a future risk, it's happening now. And these are two good examples of it happening now. This is I'm going to look at the example on the right. So in terms of Devon recently over the winter and the storms, a wonderful bit of land and a road that separated was eroded in the storms. And what was quite interesting about that is that the Environment Agency had money and had a statutory responsibility to protect and pay for the work to keep the home safe. So just to the south of the land that you've seen that's been spoiled away, to the south of that, the Environment Agency were able to fund and repair and manage that. But because this was a road, this fell into the responsibility of the local council, who you saw appeal on national television for funding to cover that, because it was an unexpected or certainly a large request, which is dipping in. If you think about that second and third bucket, it's drawing on their resources. What is another looking at that, their own uninsured risks, but the management of South Wales, their council decided to dip into that middle pot of uninsured risks and to take £2.5 million, buy some terraces, and look to manage a long-term risk, flood risk, to dwellings at a site that repeatedly flooded. So I was able to see that. So these are some good examples of current environmental risks and how they've been managed. And there are others. Overheating was mentioned, and I'm sure we'll talk about that again. But so when was this? I haven't got the date. But the overheating is happening. There've been lots of incidents relating to that, escape of oil with contamination and pollution. And of course, we've got AWAB's law and the tragic incident there in relation to mould, which again, someone of these picked up in the chat about future problems. So that's tried to show you that climate change risks are happening now, and that I have an understanding of how risk is managed within public sector organisations. But what are the responsibilities that you have? If you're a local authority, you've got a lot. And environmental issues can hit across a very wide range of them, and it's very difficult, and a question can be asked: who has the oversight and overview of the environmental issues across that piece? You have statutory and regulatory duties, asset ownership, service delivery responsibilities. You have maybe nature, ecology, and green infrastructure you might be putting in and maintaining. Also, climate change duties and commitments that you're making. You have the standard governance and risk assurance functions that examine environmental risks and are responsible for management of them, and also teams and people that are involved with looking at insurance and liability. The little yellow, I don't know what they are, yellow clouds are trying to show that really these are common features of all public sector organisations. Perhaps local authorities have more statutory and regulatory duties, but essentially there's a lot of similarities between all your organisations in so many ways. Okay. Here's our first poll. Could you have a look at the poll, which should launch automatically? Do you feel your organisation has a clear understanding of its statutory and wider environmental responsibilities? Have a look at the poll, and I can see if you're voting. Click yes, no, or don't know. Okay. So you will see, I believe, in the meeting chat, a response that at least 60% of you, or maybe even around about, believe that you have a good understanding of the statutory and wider environmental responsibilities. That's excellent. There's quite a lot that don't. So this flags some issues here. That's probably more positive than I would have imagined. I'm going to move on to the next one. I think there's another one. So, in a similar theme, do you think a single function in your organisation has oversight of all the environmental risks? Yes, no, or don't know? Submit now. Okay. Quite clearly, you don't feel that the single function in your organisation has oversight of all environmental risks. That might be okay, but let's have a look and reflect on that. Thank you for 69 of you who responded. And let's move on to the next one. And finally, how does environmental risk most commonly present in your organisation? You can select up to 3. This is really interesting, and I can shape a little bit of the talk going forward based on this. Take a bit of time to read through those. That's interesting. So quite a lot of you are flagging either that you have, it's when incident claims or there are problems, so it's already too late. Or some of you, and I wonder if I could cross-check those, whether or not you are actually undertaking climate adaptation or resilience or sustainability work, you might be aware of it. And compliance reporting and governance requirements. So only about 30% of you feel that that's where environmental risks commonly present in your organisation. Would have hoped for a bit more in that respect. That's very interesting. Thank you. 64 responses. So this might help explain why there's some reticence or some uncertainty or some difficulties. I think that we're all very aware that your public sector organisations, none of this is due to neglect. There are structural issues and difficulties the way that you're set up that mean there's some difficulties managing and keeping abreast of some of these things, and that's reflected in these answers. Or maybe perhaps in what I posit here is, your responsibilities are continually expanding. I think that's very fair to say. Yet, through pressures, your capacity is shrinking. You are having to deliver more outcomes, and well, that outcome word we'll talk about that again in a minute. And all those things. So you're doing more with less. And environmental problems are really cross-cutting and long-term and uncertain. You need people who can look across the piece and have that perspective. That second question we had a moment ago was quite telling, and that you recognise that people don't tend to have that overview. It wouldn't take long to introduce that into people's remits, but certainly you should be appreciating that I'm showing that environmental issues represent the greatest, if you want a business case, the greatest portion of uninsured risks. So there's making a case for some actions a bit later on, and you're getting more accountability. And like I said, it's systemic, not operational. It's not individuals. Very quickly, we talked about this already before, and I just dropping on a piece of work just to illustrate the contraction description. So we've done work with a harbour who have trying desperately to find funding. They don't have the money themselves to pay for enhancements to their flood protection, without which they will lose the harbour and all the buildings and heritage, etc., and livelihoods behind. And the funding regime is, and we work quite a lot with them, with the regulators and responsible bodies. It's really hard work. Funding regimes are changing. They're not necessarily, in my view, have any long-term outlook on or ability to cover anything like the extent of problems that we're going to face, particularly with flood and coastal risk management going forward. It feels like we can only deal with the worst situations. So this is just a classic example of where we are with our provision and dealing with those aspects. And as you've brilliantly said, and I think there's a reason why you've said this, and I'll explain why, but you have highlighted that climate change isn't just flooding, and it's not just coastal erosion. There's a very wide range of risks. Super pleased to see overheating and high heat stress, but think about water scarcity. No one's talking about it right now, but we'll be talking about hose pipe bans fairly soon, I'm sure, and all the other aspects. And there is plenty more. With a bit of imagination, it's hard enough with those features that we're talking about, the direct impacts, but there are other aspects, like I've mentioned, landfills, but also indirect and secondary impacts on ecology, etc., that need to be taken into account. This lot stole my thunder. Brilliant report that came out yesterday, which was produced by the Climate Change Committee, and it was the fourth assessment of the UK's preparedness and for climate change. If you're not aware of this and don't have this, please find it. This reinforces and actually says a lot of what is covered in this presentation. But it does. There's a couple of things. So in addition to helping me, it also does point a direction of travel, which is probably the big theme that I want you to take from this. Yes, climate change is affecting us now. We've said that. Adaptation remains fragmented and underdeveloped, not embedded in governance. We'll talk about that. Public infrastructure and services are increasingly vulnerable. We know about that. The economic costs, the delayed adaptation costs are increasing. Boy, they are. Governance and accountability are still weak. That's no criticism of anyone here, but we'll talk about that again in a minute. And also this secondary issue of nature degradation, which also increases organisational exposure. These are all points they raise, and some of a key feature of the report is a call for measurable outcomes and resilience standards. So yesterday, the news were talking about having maximum admissible temperatures within workplaces, and targets and thresholds and metrics, overheating risk, resilient. This is where we're going, and this is the problem that all of us here will be facing and looking to develop and respond to going forward. So that's that report by the Climate Change Committee. You may or may not be aware of other changes which, while they may not impact you directly will certainly impact you indirectly. So regulatory and governance shift. And this is just some of the key ones that I've picked up on. Sorry if that's quite a busy slide. Something I'm really interested in seeing how it develops, but there's something called the environmental outcome reporting. I don't know what it is, but it's not regulation, but it's initiative, we'll call it. It's enacted by the Environment Act a little while ago, and we're starting to see some consultation responses and getting a direction of travel, what that will be. What am I talking about? Well, if you have had a responsibility in the past to assess your plans or decision making, or in the case of the regulations, they also talk about consents. You had to consider environmental and sustainability impacts. That's what you've had to do, and have been reports of which these colourful things. I've done lots in the past. SEAs and essays, so strategic environmental appraisals or sustainability assessments of these have had to be done. Very good, very interesting, qualitative piece of work that have been trying to get people to consider environmental and sustainability issues in their actions, which is all good and well-meaning. Environmental outcome reports is getting serious about it now. We have the OEP, who have a regulatory responsibility. So that's the Office for Environmental Protection, and they're looking at the performance of public sector bodies in relation to their environmental outcomes. How do you do that? Well, you have to have an understanding of what environmental outcomes will be. So the consultation I saw that came out a little earlier this year says that environmental outcome reports will need to be produced, and they will need to be considered in decision making. So there needs to be evidence, and there will need to be a regular reporting and delivery of environmental outcomes when the regulators require it. So it's a big stick that is being fashioned, and it's a significant new level of measurable accountability that wasn't there before. It applies to some more directly than others, but what I would say is that whilst if you're a local authority, it absolutely applies to you. For some organisations, it will extend to wider public authority decision making over time. Some of you, if you're particularly work for the NHS and in healthcare, you're quite used to an outcome-based accountability already. Well, this will apply to many other decision makers. More on this as time goes on, but the direction of travel and the idea is enshrined. But you can see it's merging with the Climate Change Committee's recommendations for outcome-based measures. So we can see where all this is going. There are some words there that compare what is currently done with what the EOR framework is. I'll just draw you can't read that, but the point is that these outcomes before you might have been legally challenged in your process for not consulting or whatever. It might be the extent of the liabilities for you. Here, this is setting in scope for regulatory intervention, reputational risk, and enforcement actions. So it does up the ante in terms of the implications for you. EOR is also, so for organisations and their planning and decision making, that applies. There's also a separate EOR that applies to projects. So you'll see some changes there. They're similar, and I would foresee that, and it is envisaged that they'll mutually inform each other and will be in aid to planning. But that's not for now. So that's new regulations and new things you'll have to deal with, but don't lose sight of any responsibilities you may have already. Again, for local authorities, you may, looking at, say, how you manage contaminated land, and all the other responsibilities that you have. We are working on looking at the effectiveness of contaminated land regime, and there are some concerns that even existing stuff could be done a lot better, and is not as effective as it could be. More on that at a later point in time, but I'm trying to say it's not always just new stuff. It's are we doing the existing stuff properly as well? That's also getting increases too, in terms of how people are looking at them. And the OEP, I've been chatting to the OEP about this piece of work. I need to accelerate a little bit. So this probably is a very busy slide, and I will just pick up on a few aspects of it. I think it's fair to say that a lot of the sorts of commitments and declarations and a lot of environmental commitments that a lot of public organisations had been making were of that nature. And just to be mindful that the direction of travel seems to be more around making measurable, specific targets and outcomes. And the amount of scrutiny, and it is changing. And if you look at climate adaptation reporting powers, just yesterday there's a consultation that was closed, which was recommending that the current voluntary requirements to report climate adaptation that's their status for local authorities, but they're looking to extend the applicability to wider strategic authorities. So that's your county councils and unitary, but also looking at where if there are gaps, do we need? Is there a need for mandated reporting? So it's tightening that regulatory net around in this particular case, adaptation, and being able to see that is happening. There's wider stuff on procurement, supply chain, and ESG pressures that you're all aware of, I'm sure. And local authorities also are involved with managing and delivering and having responsibility for delivery of BNG, biodiversity net gain, and that's a 30-year commitment that's being made that might be passed on to another organisation, but you still need to monitor and still have some responsibilities for it. If you are accruing funding for anything environmental and claiming impacts and positive outcomes from your work, you need to be able to then identify and show that you are having those outcomes over a long period of time. So it's sort of more accountability for funding that you might be happy about receiving. You've got to tell more about what you've done. Likewise, ecosystem services, natural capital, being able to show the benefits of ecosystem services in terms of flood risk reduction, etc., etc. There's lots changing there. So it's, in summary, it's not all this isn't driven necessarily by capital markets like it would be for private organizations. This is more about public accountability and policy scrutiny that is falling on you to a greater extent. Let's have a quick look, another poll. If you could have a look and tell me how are environmental and climate-related liabilities changing within your organisation? So is everything I've just said, is that true or false? Where are you seeing this? So it'd be great to see if you could let me know. Fantastic. Yeah. So I'm not sure if you can see the results as they come through in real time, but I can see that generally the liabilities data are merging mainly through climate, ESG, or regulatory pressures. I think that's fair to say actually of a lot of sectors. I'm glad that there's very, very few that say it's not yet a major organisational focus or unclear. Perhaps there's some, well, hopefully the talk will help with a little bit of responsibilities and that last question. Good, thank you. Next. Whoops. Just very briefly, I talked about natural capital, ecosystem services, nature-based investments. They're all sort of commercially organised things that can go wrong, and we've looked at and talked to and involved with dealing when it goes wrong. So, for instance, if you've had your woodland and you're in year 10 and it burns down, how do you compensate for that, or how do you assess the damage, or how do you? So there's lots of new thoughts and a whole area of thinking and risk management thinking that needs to be applied to these nature-based and ecosystem services activities that lots of public organisations are getting involved with. Okay, taking a little breath. So where does it go wrong? So I've mentioned some experience there. This table, this diagram is something I'll put up a little bit earlier on, and looks at the responsibilities of a local authority in different blocks in terms of their activities. Don't forget that 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 are pretty similar to quite a lot of the activities that wider public sector organisations have to manage. So if you're failing your statutory and regulatory duties, well, there's pretty much a direct exposure there for you. But some of the biggest ones that we find is the hidden ones, and there's a piece of work we're just doing for an organisation at the moment, really is around asset ownership and land management. It's hard to keep on top of condition, and particularly in this instance where there's the organisation emerging, what's being kept, what's being taken over. There's a change in terms of and a less understanding of some of the issues that might arise from that, and it's a biggie, particularly if it's of taking on contaminated land or management of lots of environmental issues. Some of the other ones, so service delivery, you can have failures there that relate to operational decisions. Big problem as well is that through service delivery, you'll look at climate change impacts on service delivery and you think, oh, it's going to happen in the future. And if your planning isn't anticipating for it to happen over the weekend, you're missing the point. It is happening now. So you need to, when you're stress testing, you need to really evaluate your scenarios for your stress testing of what happened then. The nature ecology and climate change, there's some sort of a range of different things. Lots revolve around the fact that these sorts of pieces of work, so 4 and 5, can be prepared in quite isolation, and you can miss the bigger picture, the failures of how something that happens directly in one area will then have an indirect impact on your flood risk or flood management, or you may have commitments that you're making within a policy that you were probably never going to be able to make or manage, and there's been a lack of oversight and checking across the piece. Likewise, I feel within governance and risk assessment, and but I feel environmental risk should be a responsibility of one individual, and they should look at that core area of risk, covering all those different areas. It's not flooding, it's not drainage. If you look at environmental across the piece, look at all the things we've been talking about, and how that is the common pointer and part that relates to them all. Okay, that's fine. I'll move on. That's just an example of how regulations have changed and been unchecked, and a problem had accrued in one particular area where there was an assumption that business could continue in a certain way, yet without a little bit of investigation, it led over 15 years into quite a significant problem. So if the environmental risks, and I think you mentioned a few in your poll, of whether or not they're visible and how they are, you don't really want them to be surfacing when there's a claim or when you're having a cost. But typically it's when you've got property damage, or there's a health liability claim, or there's failure in your infrastructure. You really do not want regulatory enforcement, and that's going to become more a potential risk going forwards. And this sort of uncertainty now of some areas where there's uninsured and partly insured losses. That's where I definitely get some of my loss adjuster friends to talk to you about those. Generally, from some of I was thinking of specific claims and issues when I presented the diagram with the faults, and this really is highlighting and drilling down. I'm not really able to say too much in terms of specific case studies here, but where risks are known, it's very easy to regurgitate a list, particularly in this day and age, of potential risks. But whether or not you've properly assessed it and prioritized them, has been a significant problem, especially if you think that climate change risks or future risks are not current. Data exists, but you're not connected, you're not aware of it. That's a critical one. And you assume that maybe the insurance may cover the risks, or climate and nature risk is framed as policy, not as an exposure. So there's system failures. There's not individual failures. These are problems with the nature of public organisations. I would recommend, if you're doing anything at all, do have a dig into the Somerset flood risk case, which there was a lot of work post flood to identify and set out the ex post impact of that, and it's very, very informative to then compare such a significant case on your current planning. I recommend that. Okay, poll number 6. So which of these challenges feels most familiar in your organisation? Yes. So that moves. So there's spread across multiple teams. Yeah, there's quite an even spread there. Very interesting about no one picking up on beginning to move towards integrated or stress tested approaches. That means I'll be saying something useful in a second. So equal recognition of the challenges that are faced, and these all relate to hopefully some solutions we'll talk about. Governance tools. So hopefully you're familiar with the Swiss cheese model that I put in the background of this next slide. You all share very similar governance approaches. This relates to every single public sector organisation: corporate risk registers, asset management plans, audits, capital programmes, and insurance placement, all regular features. And you'll list climate change, but have you got measurable outcomes? And one of the responses there identified you're not quantifying or really fully understanding the sorts of risks that you might be faced. Are you looking in these at risks in isolation? And if you are, the Swiss cheese model there sort of says, well, here's one layer of the cheese is one particular risk. You go, well, that's okay, that's fine. That's one level of management or preventative control that's in place. So that's sorted that out. But risks happen when lots of different failures exist, when all the holes in the cheese align. And that's very, very much the case when it comes to environmental issues, because there are so many interrelated and interacting aspects that can create an incident or an issue. Also, do you look at cumulative and cumulative risks? I mentioned that. And Do you look at your management with an overall environmental lens? I talked earlier on. For me, seeing all these things grouped together as environmental risk, environment, climate change risks, is really, really helpful in that they're so interrelated, and that sort of approach can be quite helpful if you're looking at it in otherwise siloed ways. So, in terms of stress testing, there's lots of ways that you can do it, and I would certainly promote. Obviously, promote stress testing. Financial stress testing happens. Climate change testing also should be happening. But are you looking at longer term? How are you doing it? And I would also like to ask, are you looking, and it's something I would love to chat to anyone who's interested, are you looking at outcomes, stress test for outcomes, rather than single hazards, flooding, or whatever it is? Are you looking at outcomes? And it would be really, I'd be really interested to speak to some organisation if you wanted to talk about that. So having a more joined up approach, which you would achieve through an outcome-based stress testing report, and it should help with prioritisation and defer spending elsewhere, etc. How well integrated within environmental risk management cultures. I'm going to skip this one. And connectivity really is the answer to the previous question. I think we've mentioned it before. There's lots of issues, and it was highlighted by the CCC report. Different departments are doing different things, and connectivity is vital because the environmental risk will pop up between the gaps. That's what that is showing. And that's what that says. Can I ask you to have a look at question 9? So can that poll be, what would make environmental risk management more effective? Thank you. This really just informs what we've talked about and would either validate what I've just been mentioning. It's not possibly clear. Yeah, there's quite a uniformity of different responses across the board with that. That's probably as I would expect. It is a range of systemic features. Okay, thank you for that. We're nearly there. So let's just quickly, and I've been talking about a lot of features which might look good. So, you know, what do leading organisations do? They look at the gap between ESG and risk. Is there one? What does it mean? And that responds to the slide that I was talking about, ESG. Integrated risk asset insurance view, that's talking about the connectivity. And I'll mention a case study in a moment that relates to that. Using environmental data in capital decisions. So if you're connected, you will be doing that because you'll be able to see and identify the outcomes that your decisions will have. Nature treated in infrastructure is very, very good. That's a great example. We've seen some of those. Stress testing across functions, outcome rather than hazard led. Again, I would love to talk to someone about that. And looking closely through an environmental lens at a wide range of traditionally siloed sorts of issues that might happen. And so risk managers, especially, you've got to become more system integration gurus than, if you're doing this. Yeah, I'll talk about that. There are a number of actions that we would propose, and you know, it's all really what I've talked about is looking at what you're doing through different lenses, looking at gaps between are you ready for EORs? What's your reporting, your ARP readiness reviews? Are you ready? Where are you if you haven't been doing that? Yeah, I think that's okay. And we can help, obviously. Yeah, just a good example. I mean, this is what lots of good public sector organisations are looking at, and we've been introduced to a few. One of which is a local authority who are merging and have to report and get new insurance. We're helping them with audits of their sites and informing their initial responses for insurance, but also we'll be providing some wider advice around the sorts of aspects that we've just been discussing. Okay, mind that you must answer these 2 questions. What's your biggest takeaway from today's session? That's really interesting. Yeah, I think, thank you for the 39 that responded. Adaptation is much broader than flooding and estates. And I think I will definitely point you towards the CCC report to pick up on that particular interest aspect, if that's what you're feeling. And then the last, would there be one topic you would like to explore further? Oh, brilliant. Okay. So a quick winner is environmental liability and claims exposure, stress testing. Yeah, okay, and climate adaptation, resilience planning. So not quite fully distributed, but that's very useful, and we might be able to follow up on that. I've not done too bad. 60 seconds left. We've got there. Those are my takeaways. Those are my contact details. We have a short period for Q&A. I hope it was informative and I've enjoyed speaking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alistair. As hopefully everyone agrees, that is quite thought-provoking, and Alistair obviously knows his topic. Do we have any questions from anybody? I know I am conscious of time, and what I'll say is there is quite a lot of information in this pack, which I will be sharing with you all. So if any questions arise once you've had a chance to peruse and consider the information that we share, please fire it over to myself, Alistair, or Rob, and we'll do our best to address those questions directly to you. But has anybody got any questions at this point?
I've just got a quick question, if I may, Alistair.
Yep.
So you touched on emerging risks, and in that context, just with regards to PFAS, which is something that's quite a hot topic. I think it's emerged as an issue, but the level of impact is, I guess, still emerging. How do you see that risk transferring into the public sector?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting from an insurer's point of view. I was chatting to one of the major insurers yesterday, and certainly they are working to examine what it means across the piece of the work that they're doing. For us and what we do in terms of the assets and the liabilities that might rest with different sorts of land use, it's treated very much in the same vein that all contaminated land and potential chemicals that can cause harm are. I think there's work that's done and proposed to do screening type activities, which seems to be a direction that lots are following. But I would warn Rob that PFAS and wider emerging forever chemicals, there's lots of them, and it's hard to be able to screen because their use may come in lots of unexpected forms. So it needs to be dealt with on a case by case example. And this idea of to screen your portfolio based on the fact of whether or not it's got airfields or whatever is a bit of a you may miss something. Is that what you meant and what you wanted to know?
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
there's somebody who's got their hand up.
I'm not sure if they've just raised the hand to say thank you or if there's a question.
Okay.
I can't see anything in the chat or the Q&A.
Okay.
So I'm just thinking here we go. So from Alison, have you seen many examples of environmental indicators and targets being used to measure outcomes?
Absolutely, but not necessarily in the context we've been talking about. So not EOR reports yet. It's quite common in many areas, particularly in government policy and in evaluation. So it's the expertise and skills. It's there. There's a lot of thought that's gone into it, and the CCC report also provides some likely metrics that will be used in relation to climate change impacts. So some really good stuff there. Very happy to chat to you about that. Hope that helps. Feel free to shout out.
Yep, there is another question that's just come in. In the public sector, there are competing priorities. What messaging can help push this up the agenda?
Well, bottom line for me is that the responsibilities are bigger, money is less, but it's going to get, the scrutiny is going beyond just a magnifying glass. It is going to relate to prosecutions and oversight with groups like the OEP. That wasn't there before. So be prepared that if you're not doing things and you're not working out what your outcomes are and you're not meeting them, there will be consequences, and that wasn't there before. So I think you can certainly in a business case value that as well, in terms of some of the impacts that you're avoiding as well for good management. Yes, it's done a lot of that. It's very hard, but yeah, interesting question.
Yep. Right, I can't see any other questions in the chat or the Q&A, and I'm conscious of time. We could probably spend the rest of the afternoon talking about this and picking your brains, Alistair, but I think we'll leave it at that. As I say, I will send... Oh, right, so another question's just come in, and this might be the last one. Environmental risks are shared... Environmental risks are shared risks, but can disproportionately affect vulnerable members of the society. I think it's just a reflection on your answer there, Alistair, that some people are more affected than others, aren't they? Which is unfortunately
Thank you, Alison. I know Alison. Yeah, absolutely, and that should be part and parcel. So I'm very much a sustainability individual. So everything is interconnected and should be considered in that way. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yep. Lovely. Well, thank you again, everyone. Thanks for your time, Alistair. Thanks for your input, everybody. Sorry, I do. Someone's just got in there before. So dependent on political opinion, it can be difficult to make it a priority. Again, with the way things are changing, things are moving. It's getting the buy-in, getting the right people at the right time, almost.
Yeah. So Faith, I think being able to make a business case and with the work that you do, and to be able to boil it down to just pure cost and who will go to jail, it is a great motivator. But it does take skills and time and effort to be able to set things out in that way. But it does a rigorous climate change risk assessment or whatever, you can try and fully quantify and illustrate the value, and at least you can try. Some individuals, you can't speak for some, but that should work. And there is oversight now. So maybe that's been designed to try and get across these things.
Yeah, as Alison said, everyone cares about clean air, clean water, and safe homes, etc. So, yeah. Right, I am going to be strict now and say that's it. You've had your chance. But should anything sort of arise, any thoughts occur once you've had time to digest the plethora of information that Aliston's going to share with you, or I'll share with you based upon his presentation, please don't hesitate to get in touch with any of us. Obviously, I won't know the answer, but I know somebody that will, and we'll certainly get back to you as soon as we possibly can. But once again, thanks from me for everyone concerned. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon, and thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.